Hey y'all, I'm Pam with 44 Marketplace. And if today's your first visit to my channel, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. Please take a minute to subscribe and click the bell so you'll be notified each time I upload a video. If you like my videos, give me a thumbs up. And keep in mind, I try to put a material list in the comments below each one of the videos. If I missed something, please let me know. Okay, let's get started. So tonight what we're going to talk about is distressing. I get lots of questions about distressing from time to time, and it's really super simple, but sometimes, hey Dixie Belle Paint, sometimes people don't know what I mean when I say distressing. So tonight what I'm going to go over is mechanical distressing, chemical distressing, and wet distressing. Just to kind of clarify some things, because I know if you see other painters say things, you maybe don't know what they're talking about, so that's what we're going to do tonight. Okay, so first of all, I have these cute little pieces that I was given, and they got a little bit of paint on them so that you can see. And sometimes it's a lot easier to distress if you've got this kind of detail. And sometimes when it's just this straight, it's not quite so easy. So that's what we're going to go over tonight. All right. So thanks for tuning in, and thanks for following Dixie Belle Paint. If you don't follow me at 44 Marketplace, I would appreciate it. All right, so we have several beautiful colors. This one is the Gulf, and what we're going to talk about is if you mechanically distress, which is what most people think about when they distress. You just take a sanding sponge, and the lower the number, the higher the grit, the faster it is going to distress. Hey Joe! It is going to distress much faster, okay? So, I usually use a 150-220 so that one side is that and one side is the other. And I'm going to tell you, if you dampen this sponge, because you can see it is a sponge, it distresses really, really fast, especially if it's over fresh paint. So that's what we're going to chit-chat about today. I painted these pieces this weekend, and you can see the base color underneath here is black. So if I start distressing along this edge, I stand corrected, it's red. I thought it was black. All right, so you can see immediately just a couple of little swipes and I already am to the red. Now if you distress too much, you can distress right through the original finish into the wood. That's why a lot of times, especially for newbies, I don't recommend manual distressing, because the thing about it is if you start distressing on your grandmother's shift robe or something like that, you can actually get into the wood, and I mean you can really, I don't want to say damage, but you can damage the piece of furniture before you realize it if you are using a 150 or even if you're using an 80 or 100. So that's the thing, is keep in mind, if you are manually distressing with sandpaper, it eats through your finish really fast and it can get down into the original finish. And in some cases, people do not really want to go through the original finish. They're wanting to go down to the original finish. So if you manually distress, you can get there fast. So now I'm going to go to this next one. All right, to the next one, it is a wet distress. Now, when you wet distress, you can do that one of a few different ways. You can take something like this that's got a sponge on one side and a Scotch-Brite on the other side, and you can use that to distress fresh paint or even not fresh paint. But I'm going to tell you, if you're using this over fresh paint, the sponge side will distress plenty quickly. If you start trying to distress fresh paint with the Scotch-Brite side, it distresses really, really quickly. So I'm going to throw some paint on this piece. Let me get my Mr. bottle. It's beautifully decorated, don't you think? All right, so I'm going to show you guys, if you have a piece that has a lot of detail like this one does, we're going to use Dixie Belle's new French linen. We're going to go over it, because I'm going to tell you, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll do kind of a wet distress on a piece. And one type of wet distress is to distress it while your paint is actually still wet. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over this just like this. All right, you can see it's covered with Dixie Belle French linen. All right, now what you can do is if you want to just rub through that, you can take a damp sponge and rub through and let a little bit of that gold show. Now you're doing this while your paint is still wet, which is why it's called a type of wet distress. Show you what it looks like. All right, see how cute that is? You've got just a little bit of gold showing, and it is just enough. Oh, girl, I don't know who you're talking to. I know that's not me. It's just enough so that it shows through, and you saw how little effort it takes. It just took a little light brush with my sponge to go through the wet paint, and now it didn't take very much effort. If you wait until your paint dries to wet distress, you can use this side, the sponge side of your little scrubby, or you can use the Scotch-Brite side. But keep in mind, sometimes the Scotch-Brite side, especially over fresh paint, it eats through it like within one wipe. So be mindful that if you're doing a wet distress, you can do it with a baby wipe, a wet cloth, a sponge, whichever way you want to do it. But sometimes it goes really a lot faster than you're expecting. So if you do it with a wet sponge with wet paint, it does great. If you do it with freshly painted dry paint and a sponge and a scrubby, it does great. And always, always, always you can use this. And a lot of people, I don't think, realize that these are actually sponges. You can dampen these and they really take it off fast. All right, so that one is that. And then there is the chemical one, which I was going to show you. But as I was getting out of the Jeep coming from my warehouse, guess what? I dropped my bottle of vinegar and water and dropped it in the parking lot, and it broke. But I'm going to go over it with you anyway. When you have vinegar and water half and half, the chemical mechanism actually breaks down the paint. So a lot of people don't realize that you can distress with a lot of different things. You can distress with just plain old water, because it will reactivate your paint and have it release. But you can also mix vinegar and water, and vinegar actually causes the paint to separate. So when you spritz your piece, whether you mist it, whether you spray it, whether you brush it, however you do it, when you put the vinegar and water on your piece, it actually causes your paint to separate, which is a great way to give a chippy, weathered look. And I wanted to demonstrate it for you tonight, but like I say, I broke mine, but it is a great look. If you haven't tried it, you might want to take an old piece, something like this, and spray it with it. Now this piece, I actually painted dark, and then I scrubbed over it with my sanding sponge, and you can see the color underneath was kind of a coppery color. And I put caviar over the top of that. See how I just scrubbed through there? It's not exactly even, it's just kind of scratched through randomly. So there you go. You can see what we're doing, and you can see how well it just scrapes right through there. But that one I did with my sanding sponge. So it just depends on which way you want to do it. Whether you want to do it with your vinegar and water, and like I say, I usually mix my vinegar and water half and half. Others may do something different, but half and half vinegar, spritz it on there, and your paint can be dry, almost dry, or still wet, and the vinegar does cause it to separate. If you want to have the run look, spritz it, and it will run beautifully. If you haven't tried it, that's great. Another thing that also helps it to separate even more, put some salt on it. Vinegar and water, and then throw some salt on it, it's amazeballs. What happens to it is totally unbelievable. If you haven't tried it, you're missing some fun. Take an old piece and just try it. Half vinegar, half water, spritz, spritz, spritz. Let it sit for just a minute and then throw some salt on it. Want to see how quickly paint separates? It really separates. So another way that you can distress things is with a different color of paint or glaze. This piece, what I did was I took and I put Dixie Belle Fluff, and I went over it with Manatee Gray. And this side, I did Manatee Gray, and I went over it with Gravel Road. Can you see how I just dry brushed over that color so that it distressed it, but it basically distressed it by dry brushing it. That way I didn't agitate the paint at all. All I did was just drag my brush lightly over it, and it picked up the pattern that's underneath here. so that it gave it almost a distressed look. You can do that as well, and that's what I did here. I distressed this one with glaze. I know a lot of people call this glazing, but a lot of people look at this and think that this piece has been distressed, and all I did was put glaze into the crevices and let it dry. Put glaze in, wipe it off, and let it dry. And some people consider this distressed. So sometimes when you're discussing, especially if you're discussing finishes with a customer, or if you're discussing finishes with friends, and you talk about distressing, sometimes clarification needs to be made. Are we going to distress it with glaze? Are we going to wet distress it like we did this piece here? Are we going to dry distress it, mechanically distress it? Are we going to use vinegar and water? There's a lot of different ways to distress things that I don't think people realize, and you can dry brush a light color over dark, a dark color over light. You can use glaze, you can use wax. There's so many ways that you can distress that I don't think people really realize. Like this right here, you can see. I just alternated the colors, and that made it look kind of distressed. But if all else fails, we all know the sanding sponge is one of the favorite ways to distress. Another thing I want to go over is when you distress, sometimes it's really good to keep in mind how it would naturally distress. Take this piece back here, for instance. It would naturally distress around the drawers where they open and shut. It would distress around the hardware where you put your hands. Have you ever looked at your car door where you put your fingernails and stuff? That's how your piece is going to distress. Your piece should distress where it's been used and things like that. Now, I know a lot of people like to distress in the middle of the side or in the middle of the top or something. Most pieces that I get in that are actually vintage that have been distressed over the years from use, they're not distressed in the middle of the side, in the middle of the top, or anything like that. So something that I like to tell new painters is when you're distressing, keep in mind that where it would naturally distress, where the drawers open and shut, where you put your hands on the handles, things like that, on the tops of the corners, it would naturally distress there because odds are that corner gets bumped or nicked or something like that. If you are refinishing furniture for people with small children, or if you have small children and you're refinishing, or you have giant dogs like I do, another good thing to remember is distress your furniture now. Because I can tell you at my house, our sleeper sofa gets turned over by my sweet little Isabel. So things get distressed naturally. So if I bring in something that I've already distressed, guess what? It doesn't distress me when they get distressed naturally, right? So when I do pieces for my daughters, they have small children. You know, I have 6 grandchildren. I have a new one coming. We automatically distress theirs right now, right up front, because there's no reason to stress about distress, right? Okay, so tonight that was a quick one. I just wanted to go over and let you know that when you're talking to customers, sometimes when you're discussing distressing, you think one thing and your customers think something else. So keep in mind, distressing can be done with glaze. It can be done with a sponge or a scrubby. It can be done with a sanding sponge. It can be done with wax, or it can be done even with coins. When your paint is wet, you can take a coin and drag it along the edge, and it gives you the most beautiful, beautiful distress line. Now, keep in mind, it's very even, but if you drag a penny around the edge, like something like this, take a penny and drag it right across here, or a quarter or something, it will give you a beautiful distress, and it's super easy to do. So the next time you're getting ready to distress, think, which way do I want to do it? Thanks for watching tonight, guys. I'll see you next Monday at 8 p.m. and you guys have a great evening.